I'm Tracy Sabol. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, standing strong. New developments in Senator Tommy Tuberville's stance to protect the unborn. High stakes. The White House is working to free Americans currently detained in Iran. Why the deal is drawing sharp criticism. The church in Switzerland. A closer look at the recent report into allegations of clergy sexual abuse in the European country. And calling the doctor. Pope Francis says a medical professional from Venezuela is a model for all Christians. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. John Chrysostom. Our top story tonight, Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville is refusing to back down from his decision to hold up more than 300 military promotions over the Defense Department's abortion travel policy. Growing pressure continues, and not just from Democrats. Now, several Republican colleagues and leaders are adding to the pressure. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with the latest. Eric?
That is correct, Tracy. Good evening. Several Republican senators, including leader Mitch McConnell, have openly criticized Tommy Tuberville's strategy, calling it a mistake. Some are urging him to narrow his holds on Biden nominees who make policy decisions and let the other military promotions go through. Now, Senator Tuberville continues to tell me that it's the DOD who's breaking the law because they're the ones who changed its policy.
Listen to me. I'm not changing my mind. I mean, we're here. We've been 7 months. We'll be here this time next year if they don't get off their high horse and start confirming these people.
Senator Tommy Tuberville says the burden to get these nominations done is on the majority in the Senate, and that's Democrats.
Just do your job, Chuck Schumer. You're the head of the Senate, okay? You're the leader. Come to the floor and let's put these people up, especially the ones that they say they really need, like the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the chiefs that run the Army, Navy, Air Force, all those people. And I'm fine with it. One at a time, bring them up. Take about 2 hours each.
This is a Republican problem. Don't pawn it off on us. It was created by Tuberville solely himself. And it's up to the Republicans to put pressure on him to back off.
Others agree it's time for Leader Schumer to take a vote.
They like the politics of this. They like being able to argue that Republicans are against the military. That's not true. I don't think the American people are buying that.
Also on the Hill, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and other tech experts gave the first ever bipartisan Senate briefing on artificial intelligence. Democratic Senator Cory Booker is optimistic.
Well, it's not a time for fear. It's a time for bold, optimistic thinking about creating a world where we expand opportunity, we expand possibility, and we make an impact on some of the intractable problems that we're facing.
Both sides of lawmakers agree that Congress has an important role in regulating this emerging technology and to correct the mistakes that it made during social media. Some are calling for a complete overhaul of big tech and possibly creating a new regulatory agency like an extension of the FCC. We also want to let you know that we just found out that Senator Mitt Romney will not be seeking re-election. His term will end in January of 2025. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
President Joe Biden offers his reaction to the latest inflation numbers that show prices jumped again in August, up 3.2% from July and 3.7% from last year. And that economic pain only continues. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
That's right, Tracy. President Joe Biden released a statement on those latest, very stubborn inflation numbers. The blame, says the administration, the cost of filling up your gas tank.
On the August Consumer Price Index, President Joe Biden writes, overall inflation has also fallen substantially over the last year, but I know last month's increase in gas prices put a strain on family budgets. The chair of the Council of Economic Advisors joined the White House press briefing this afternoon.
It is correct, as you pointed out, that gas price, the spike in August, caused nearly all of the increase in inflation last month.
But the RNC tweeting, today's inflation report showed that the inflation rate surged to 3.7%, more than 2.5 times the rate when Biden took office. Prices are up 17.4%, and real wages are down 3.1% since Biden took office. That's Bidenomics. Meanwhile, in Russia, North Korea's Kim Jong-un sitting down alongside Russian President Vladimir Putin. The U.S. warning the two leaders may strike a deal to supply ammunition to Moscow. Also in the press briefing room, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby.
We continue to urge North Korea to meet its public commitments not to support Russia's war in Ukraine. No nation on the planet, nobody, should be helping Mr. Putin kill innocent Ukrainians.
And more reaction coming in from the White House tonight to the opening of an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre addressed that today.
They have spent all year investigating the president. That's what they've spent all year doing. And have turned up with no evidence, none, that he did anything wrong.
And as the impeachment inquiry plays out, President Biden convening a meeting today with his cancer cabinet. The goal, quote, to end cancer as we know it.
The goal is to mobilize a whole-of-country effort to cut American cancer rate deaths in half in the next 25 years, or sooner, God willing.
Now, back to the impeachment inquiry into President Biden over his family's business dealings. As that ramps up, a top Biden advisor today sent out a memo to the news media urging it to, quote, ramp up its scrutiny of House Republicans, end quote. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, the Biden administration has signed off on a prisoner swap deal with Iran that also includes the release of $6 billion in frozen assets to Tehran in exchange for 5 U.S. hostages. Meantime, the Jewish community in Iran is being urged to refrain from publicly celebrating the upcoming Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, due to rising tensions in the capital city of Tehran over the impending one-year anniversary of the death of Mahsa Amini, a young Iranian woman who died after being detained by police. Joining us now is Rabbi Yaakov Menken, Managing Director of the Coalition for Jewish Values. Rabbi Menken, always good to have you on. A lot to get to today, but first, let's talk about this prisoner swap deal with Iran. It is receiving a lot of criticism from Republicans and also from some Democrats as well. Of course, the big issue here is that $6 billion in Iranian assets that will be released to the country. Some lawmakers are saying this is nothing more than ransom being paid to Iran. But Rabbi Menken, what of that money? How will it be used? And what sort of impact could that have on the U.S. and also our biggest ally in the Middle East, Israel?
Well, it kind of is, as you outlined in the package that preceded that, where you said that, here we are, we're coming up on the one-year anniversary of a woman who was murdered. There were, of course, robust protests against the government last year. What are they going to use the $6 billion to do? What are they going to do with that money? They're going to repress their own people, and they're going to encourage terrorism throughout the region. Why do we know that? Because that's what they've been doing with the money they have so far. They've not been using the money to enhance the lives of their people. They've not been using the money to build infrastructure in Iran. They've been using it to fund Hamas and Hezbollah to commit acts of terrorism against Israel. And they've been using it to repress their own people. It's obvious that this is going to continue. It's a problem when people decide to negotiate with terrorists. It's terrible that 6 Americans were detained. And of course, all of that was illegal. But the problem is that when in return for that, they get $6 billion. Not only do they get 6 detained terror supporters returned to Iran, but they're also getting $6 billion to finance more of the same.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the Jewish community is kind of on high alert there in Tehran because of possible gatherings, maybe violence over Mahsa Amini's death, the anniversary. There's also safety concerns in Israel as well as we come up on the High Holy Day. What more do you know about that?
Unfortunately, the Mossad keeps their secrets very well. We don't really know what's going on. But if they say they're on high alert, there's obviously been some warning. I mean, the same with FBI alerts in this country. We don't really know what the details are. We just know that they're planning, that they've got word that the terrorists are planning something, and therefore the community needs to be extraordinarily vigilant.
Yeah. On a different note, but I want to stay in Israel. Yesterday, the country's Supreme Court heard its first challenge to the judicial overhaul, which has sparked numerous protests and divided the country. Can you give us more of an update on this and where you think this is all headed?
Well, I don't really know the inner workings of what's going on in Israel. What I can tell you is the judicial reform is not only reasonable, but at its core, it is democratic. the current judiciary in Israel, unlike in the United States and in most other first world countries, the current members of the Supreme Court there have extraordinary sway over who is selected to join them. And they are not subject to the normal democratic nominating process, for example, of that used in the United States, which kind of ensures a balance of judges who favor, that at least they're selected according to the values of one party over the other. That doesn't exist in Israel. And here, the idea of judicial reform is to allow the democratically elected Knesset, the parliament, to have more of a say in the final laws in the country. And the idea that that itself is going in front of the judiciary is a failure of the whole process.
Well, Rabbi Minkin, we have to leave it right there. Always great to have you on. Thank you so much for weighing in. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great week.
You too. And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including clergy abuse, analysis of the recently released report into allegations of misconduct in Switzerland, and an archbishop in Canada responds to the new developments about a story regarding possible mass graves. We first reported last week, a recent story in Canada says that no human remains have been found at 14 alleged burial sites of Indigenous children. Starting back in 2021, stories emerged of the existence of supposed mass graves of students at residential schools, some of which were run by the Catholic Church. And we go now to Archbishop Richard Gagnon, the head of the Archdiocese of Winnipeg, Manitoba, where some of the residential schools were located. Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Curious, what was your initial reaction when the story first surfaced about the mass graves, and now that it turns out so far no human remains have been found at the 14 suspected mass burial sites?
Well, I think in this particular case, these 14, as they call them, anomalies, were detected by ground-penetrating radar, and previous to that, there were a number of stories over the years passed around by people in the community that there were grave sites under the church, and so that's where these 14 anomalies were determined. And as far as the diocese is concerned, we were prepared for any result whatsoever in terms of this process, and so we embarked upon this, and a very careful professional investigation was undertaken. And the results were negative in terms of any human remains. So, I mean, it's always good to have that kind of result, but certainly we were as curious as anybody about these possibilities under the church. It's a very large church, and the basement area is dirt, and so, we were prepared for any particular result that may come from this process.
Yeah, and how is the story? How is it being covered in Canada, if at all? Is it drawing any attention?
I think initially when we began the process of this excavation, we began with an early morning pipe ceremony led by the Indigenous community up there. There was a lot of national attention paid to that. But at the end of the 4-week period of excavation, the national news was not quite as prevalent. Some of the networks reported the results, and others didn't play it up very big at all. So it began with a much more national notice than the way it ended.
And as we know, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he spoke out quite strongly about the initial reports about the mass graves. But what about now? Has he said anything about these new findings?
I'm not sure whether or not the Prime Minister made any comment on our particular case. When you're speaking of mass graves, there's no mass graves in Canada. This has been downplayed by the Indigenous people themselves. What you have had over the past couple of years has been the use of ground-penetrating radar uncovering unmarked graves. There's no mass graves. Nobody's alleging that in Canada. So it's a matter of unmarked graves in communities where there were residential schools. And so in this particular case in Manitoba, where this excavation occurred, I'm not aware of any comment from the federal government about this particular case.
What about the faithful? Have they responded to these new developments?
I have not had a lot of reply from people. I think in general it's safe to say that people are very supportive of the bishops in general who are in favor of any kind of professional investigation into these findings. But all of that is contingent upon the support of the Indigenous community itself. And the good news here is that the Archdiocese of Winnipeg entered into a cooperative venture, a good communication and agreement with the Pine Creek Reserve in partnership with the RCMP to embark upon this project. So it's a good example of what can be done when there is openness and good communication in trying to determine the historical record of this question.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us about all of this. We're going to continue to follow it. We really appreciate it. God bless you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, another story we have been following. There are new developments tonight in the investigation into clergy sexual abuse in Switzerland. The Swiss Bishops' Conference revealed an ongoing Vatican-ordered probe into the handling of sexual abuse allegations by church officials. The inquiry is expected to last several weeks. Joining us now from Rome is Rudolph Gehrig, EWTN Vatican journalist. Rudolph, great to see you. So what are the results of these preliminary studies that were presented yesterday in Switzerland?
Good evening, Tracy. The study mentions 1,002 cases of abuse since the middle of the 20th century. There are about 510 accused abusers and 921 alleged victims. In 39% of the cases, the victim was female, just under 56% were male. And in 5% of the cases, the gender could not be clearly determined in the sources. Of the files evaluated, 74% of the cases concern the sexual abuse of minors. Even infants were said to have been sexually abused. The research team accuses church leaders of being negligent in applying church law in many cases and even actively covering up many crimes and protecting the abusers. They also note in their criticism that the bishops not really reacted in a good way, so they even tried to covering up many crimes and protecting the abusers. They also note that they have not been given access to every archive and that some files were even destroyed in 2 of the dioceses.
And the Vatican, as you know, has also gotten involved. What is the reason for the Vatican's investigation?
A former spokesman for the Swiss Bishops' Conference, the Swiss priest Nicola Petticher, wrote a letter to the Pope in May in which he made serious accusations against Swiss bishops and priests. He claims that the Bishops' Conference in Switzerland is doing too little to clear up abuse cases, even covering it up. So the Vatican had to investigate now, and this is the result.
What's been the reaction to the preliminary investigations, in particular by the bishops?
In an initial response to the study, the president of the Swiss Bishops' Conference, Bishop Felix Gmür, has stated that the Church must now self-critically address the, I quote, mechanisms of power, our view on women, the concept of priesthood, and the Church's teaching on sexuality, end quote. This is the same rationale used in the neighboring Germany to justify the controversial German synodal way, which is seeking to change church teaching in the areas of authority, the ordination of women, the celibacy, and human sexuality. However, not everyone agrees with the statement, but it is obvious that the church in Switzerland is in a serious crisis, and according to the research team responsible for the study presented yesterday, these cases documented so far are, quote, undoubtedly just the tip of the iceberg.
Rudolph, before I let you go, what comes next? I mean, what are the next steps for the Vatican, and will there be any consequences?
Yeah, it was already confirmed on Sunday that Bishop Joseph Bonnemar of Tours is leading a preliminary canonical investigation on behalf of the Vatican against several members of the Swiss Bishops' Conference. This investigation is expected to be completed by the end of this year. But this morning, Jean-César Scarcella, the 71-year-old abbot of the Abbey of Saint-Maurice, he released a statement admitting that he has been accused of abusing a teenager. And more crimes committed by other members of the Swiss church hierarchy are expected to be revealed. So the next days and weeks will certainly be painful for Catholics in Switzerland and for the victims, of course, as well.
Yeah, very, very concerning there. Rudolph, thank you so much for that report. Rudolph Gehrig, EWTN Vatican journalist. Thank you again. Up next on EWTN News Nightly, Fighting for the Faithful. A new report sheds light on religious freedom in Iran. Plus, Pope Francis reflects on a doctor who died a century ago but can still save lives. As mentioned earlier, Saturday marks the one-year anniversary of a death in Iran that nearly launched a revolution. Mahsa Amini died while in the custody of Iran's morality police. Yesterday, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom released its annual report on Iran. The study urged policymakers to take seriously the grave nature of religious freedom violations in the country. And here to explain more about the report's findings is Susie Gelman, Commissioner for the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Susie, great to have you on the show tonight. This report in Iran is really alarming. Can you give us a little more detail on some of these rather grim findings and also what you're recommending, that is, to the U.S. government?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, especially as you mentioned, we're on Saturday observing the one-year anniversary of Mahsa Amini's murder by Iranian authorities. Remember, just to remind your audience, she was arrested for not apparently covering her hair adequately, according to the Iranians, and she unfortunately died in detention, and that set off a massive protest movement, which continues to this day, but it has not been without consequences. So the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, our report details the harassment, arrest, detention, torture, and killing of religious minorities in Iran. There are two minorities in particular, the Baha'i and Christians. Both groups comprise less than 1% of the Iranian population, but they have been under particular focus from the Iranian authorities. Baha'is have been arrested, including 4 members of the Iran Friends of Iran, a group of 7 Baha'i leaders who each previously served a decade in prison, and 4 of them have been rearrested, imprisoned. Christians report pressure from the government not to participate in the protests, and if they do, they are sexually harassed by the police, as well as when they are in detention, there are reports of sexual assaults on Christian prisoners in custody. So needless to say, we're very concerned that, especially as we approach the first anniversary of Mahsa Amini's killing, that Iran will increase its targeting of religious minorities and arrests of peaceful protesters. This is already underway. Scores of Baha'is have been arrested in the past week, and Mahsa Amini's uncle himself was arrested on September 6th. So it's imperative, as far as we're concerned, that the United States government hold accountable the Iranian government officials who are violating religious freedom on a daily basis.
And what exactly do you think, Susie, can be done about that to hold them accountable?
Well, there are a few things that we think would be useful and helpful. First of all, USCIRF agrees with a UN special rapporteur that Iran's actions may constitute crimes against humanity, specifically murder, imprisonment, enforced disappearances, torture, rape, sexual violence, persecution. So we urge the U.S. government to support the efforts of the UN Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Iran and we support a UN Security Council referral of the matter of Iran to the International Criminal Court. In addition, we encourage Congress to reauthorize the Lautenberg Amendment, which is a family reunification program that was created in 1990. It has been reauthorized by Congress every year. It enables Iranians who are able to get out of Iran to transition through Vienna, where they're processed and then brought to the United States. And finally, we just want to see the pressure kept on Iran about these egregious human rights and religious freedom violations that are taking place on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, it is shocking indeed. Susie, thank you so much for coming on and shedding light on all of this. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for helping to highlight this issue. Appreciate it.
Finally tonight, Pope Francis says a doctor in Venezuela who is on the path to sainthood is a model of the gospel in action.
Non segue le proprie aspirazioni, ma la disponibilità ai disegni di Dio.
As Weekly Talk at the Vatican, the Holy Father pointed to the life of Blessed Jose Gregorio Hernandez, known as the Doctor of the Poor. He had a cheerful disposition and turned down financial wealth to become rich from the gospel. The doctor was killed back in 1919 after being hit by a car while delivering medicine. Well, thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night and God bless.